Me over coffee as we delve into topics that affect our everyday lives. Today I'm in conversation with Gwen Lamont, and she is the author of A View from Coffin Ridge, A Childhood Exhumed. She also has a master's in fine arts and a master's in social services and social work. And today we're actually going to be exploring the book, A Childhood Exhumed, and the journey that she took on many levels in which to develop the book and be able to visit and do many book tours, and I'm so grateful that she is taking the time to be with us today. We have a lot to talk about.
It seems we do.
And it was lovely to find out that we're practically neighbors and didn't know that.
Who knew? Almost right across my backyard.
Almost.
If I walked through my backyard, I could go to your street.
Oh
yes.
My gosh,
yeah,
isn't that amazing?
Amazing.
Well, it's a small world, that's for sure. But I had the pleasure of purchasing your book and reading your book, and it took, not only was it a journey of talking about your childhood and the events in your childhood, but it also took me on a journey as well. One of the things about the book was that we lived in the same general territory growing up. Oh. Toronto, Scarborough, and of course now on our way to London, we go through Moncton. And so many of the features of the book I was able to landmark. Now my childhood was very different from yours, and we want the viewers and the readers to delve into the book. So I'm not going to give away a lot of that, but my childhood was very different from yours.
Most people's were.
And so maybe we could explore a little bit about the opening scene in the book is walking into the fields on Coffin Ridge.
Yes.
And coming to the realization that now was the time.
Yes. Yes.
So how did the landscape of Coffin Ridge, facilitate in that decision?
I don't know if you read the review that Michael Danton did of the book, and he said it reads like Gwen has been hammering out prose in a Spartan garret all of her life. And I thought to myself, how did he know that? Because when I wrote, once I made the decision to write, I would get up at 4 a.m. before work, and I'd write for 3 or 4 hours, and I overlooked the vineyard. And when the time came, when I realized that the time was now to tell my story, to piece the story together, because it still wasn't pieced together, one night I was compelled to get out of bed and go through that vineyard. And as you know from the opening scene, I relate it to the vines, that need to go deep, the life and death that's being waged by those roots. They have to go deep to get to water, and it's the thing that strengthens them, to be crushed only to be resurrected in a bottle of wine. Out in that vineyard, there is a tree that is 238 years old. And that tree gives off this, I say it's a female tree, gives off this wisdom. I know it sounds crazy, but when I look at that tree, I see what that tree saw all those years before I was born. And I think it was something like that I knew that night that I had to go back, and I had to go to all the places where that young girl had experienced those things in my childhood. And that was the night that I made the decision that I had to tell You know, Mary Jane, when you come from a family, as you know I came from, secrets and promises to keep secrets are a huge thing. My father was a charming alcoholic gambler. My mother was emotionally unstable. And in a family like that, you do learn to keep secrets. And throughout my teen years, that's what I did. Yeah, so that's what happened that night. And that's, yeah, the vines have a special place in my heart.
Well, the other thing about the vines is the soil they were growing in, they had to fight to grow.
Yes.
The soil was not welcoming and nurturing. In order for the vines to grow, they really not only had to go deep, but they also had to struggle to survive. And I see that analogy throughout the book, the struggle to survive. But I also saw in the book, and I mentioned this to you off camera, is something that as you were going through your childhood, you learned strategies. You learned strategies in order to navigate a situation. And you were always figuring out from a very young age, figuring out the landscape, like what's happening in this household. And a couple of things that really struck me. One was you always agreed with your dad. And the other one was you were always listening. And you were always taking in what the conversation was. And part of that navigation or that strategy was to navigate the situation. When you were very young, you said, I'm going to my room and pack my clothes. It was just, okay, this is the next piece that I needed to do in order to navigate whatever situations were happening.
When you're in an alcoholic home, you learn this thing called hypervigilance. So I was always, and to this day, if I go into a room, I can tell you who, I can tell who to watch out for. I usually know who the alcoholic is. There's because that's what you're doing all the time when you're in a family like mine. And you align with one parent, as you just said. My dad was the one that I aligned with, against my mom, I think. She was hard to take at times, as you know from the book. Yeah, hypervigilance, that's what you learn strategies, you learn strategies. The other thing I say though, Mary Jane, is that when you're a child, it's your norm. You don't know it's not how other families are, it's how your family is. And so the things that happened to me were the norm. I wasn't thinking this was unusual until you start to get older and you see other families. Then you know, yeah, maybe we are a bit different. You know, my alcoholic grandmother coming to the small town of Moncton, it was outrageous. She was outrageous, but entertaining.
Well, I think too, I'm always curious about how people allow themselves to become vulnerable in telling their stories. Like, I'm always grateful that a person would open up and do that and share that, because there's always something for the reader to learn about themselves or about someone else in their life, and to better understand what's happening. But there's also that piece where, as a little girl, not only being hypervigilant, but survival. And I saw the survival in this child that astounded me. I'm going to make it through somehow. And one of the pieces is that there weren't mentors early on in your life, but there was this sense of survival. This is what I gained from reading each of the stories. And then it became the mentors
Yes.
came into your
Yes.
life
Yes.
to support you, maybe in ways you didn't realize at the time.
Yes. 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 The first person, because when I look back, yes, you're right. There weren't any mentors, and as a matter of fact, you know the story about going to Vacation Bible School. That turned on me. So there wasn't anywhere to go. But yes, when I was 14, a social worker said 2 sentences to me that stayed with me the rest of my life. And then along the way, as I was making my way past my teen years, yes, there were people that supported me, that saw something in me not worth saving. I don't like to think that I was that I might never not have been saved, but maybe I wouldn't have. We don't know that. What I said at the gala, I was at a gala on Saturday night. I said, I'm not a miracle. I'm the result of ordinary, everyday people doing good to a child, being good to a child. That is sometimes all it takes. And in my case, the social worker that said those 2 sentences, I mean, she won't even remember who I am, but I remembered her. And long after I'd forgotten the events, those 2 sentences stayed with me and helped me.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's, I think we can never underestimate the power of encouraging words
No, we can't.
from an adult, and it doesn't have to be a family member. It can be outside of a circle, that people see something in you. And this is what I was gaining when I was reading through it, going, oh my God. Oh my God, so many times. But the strength, the strength to go on. And I mentioned this to you earlier. It was almost like an archaeological dig, where you get one piece here and one piece there and one piece here and one piece there, and then it's like a big jigsaw puzzle. I'm working on one at home, and all these pieces lying around the dining room table, and then starting to fit them in. And that process that you went through in starting to put them all together must have been.
Well, you know, I again, this will sound unusual, but this is how it was.
Yeah.
I felt that the young girl I was had been left in these various circumstances, invisible, unspoken, and that was necessary. That was necessary. Once my teen years were done, it was necessary for me to put them aside.
Yeah.
I couldn't understand them. But when I did the archaeological dig, I went to each of those places, sometimes multiple times, and often would write immediately after. I went to graveyards. As you know, there was a number of deaths underneath my life. I went to graveyards, and I wrote after I went to graveyards, because for me, some of those deaths that happened early on, I would stand at a grave and say, look at all the years I've had that this person didn't have. And in that way, I say I wrote my young self home. I wrote her visible. And then I had to welcome her into our lives, so I would reconcile that past with my present. Otherwise, how can one carry on if they haven't done that work?
Well, so many of us don't necessarily take the time to do that work. We just put one foot in front of each other day to day getting through. But I think when this book made me stop and think about my childhood and my growing years, and I was always perplexed, because I know that your mother had entrenched certain behaviors. And I often, was perplexed about my own mom, because at that time I didn't have the language to say depression.
Right.
And often my mother would be sitting on a stool looking out the window, and as kids, I have 2 sisters. You have 2. two sisters,
yes.
and going, I wonder where she is.
Yes.
You know.
Yeah.
You know, and it wasn't until you start reading the book and start pulling out those little pieces and saying, oh, I'm wondering about this. I'm
Yeah.
wondering about that. And the scrubbing of the kitchen floor.
Yes.
Like, I just went, oh my
Yes.
gosh. I mean,
It was the only thing she could control.
that
Those poor women.
I identified with that.
Yes.
Now, because in the era of
Yes.
1950s, 1960s, 1940s, there were gender-determined roles
Yes.
and boxes.
And that was it. And you were a victim of your biology. I mean,
oh yeah,
when you think about those years and how little choice a woman had,
yeah,
and I think, I mean, I had to, because I was estranged from my mom for a couple of years. I attempted to ask her questions, and she wasn't able to. She just wasn't able to give me what I needed. As you know, I made the decision to go back with her to the places where
Yes.
those things had happened to her. And it was in doing that that I was then able to reconcile her behavior. And forgiveness isn't, it's not the word I would use. Acceptance is what I would use. My mother always said I did the best I could, and I'd say, but it wasn't good enough.
yeah,
But after that trip to Toronto, to all the places where she had some very traumatic things happen to her, I was able to say she did do the best she could with the resources she had. You can't forgive someone who couldn't have done it any other way. She couldn't have done it any other way. And so I had to accept that. And that was freeing, to be able to accept that. And I was able to write about that piece after I did that.
that was one. I mean, there was many pieces in the book that kind of hit home for me, but that was one piece that I felt I wish I had been able to do with my mom, was to revisit some of the places, or even some of the stories of her life, to better understand what was happening. And it wasn't until I sort of started to grow older myself, realized that she was in a box. My mom was in a box, and she wanted more.
Yes.
And then she has 3 daughters that she wants them to stay in that box.
Yes.
Because that's what she knows. But unfortunately, she had 3 really strong-willed daughters who was having nothing to do with the box.
And I think the women from that era looked at their daughters and wanted to keep them in the box, because to set them free was to be jealous of them for doing better. And as you know, my father eventually felt that way about me. Why would you go to university? A factory job is just right for you. You could be a supervisor. Right.
Yeah, I've heard something similar in my own life. So I think that but that's what they knew.
Right. Yeah.
And that's what they grew up with.
They also grew up, at least my mom did, you know, she grew up in a very poor home, and it was the most excitement she ever had is to go to the movies. You know, they'd scrounge together money to go to the movies. And what were the movies? They were these romantic, and that's what she believed marriage was going to be. And she told me one Friday night, 6 months after she got married, her head was in an oven, she was scrubbing it, and he was off with the boys. And she thought, well, this wasn't in the movies. Right, and so it's disappointment, and then chasing after that romantic dream that doesn't exist.
The holding on to the wedding album.
Yes,
This was a place of safety for her at that time. And continually went back to the wedding album as her little safety spot. And that's all she had, was a spot.
And I'd sit beside her, and she'd want me to tell her where it had all gone. Well, I was 7 years old. I don't know. What did I know? But
So as you, I know that we're kind of jumping because there's so much, but as you got older and you had mentors that said you can do more, education is open to you,
Yes.
And then you started that journey of education, and then you couldn't stop.
I couldn't stop. I couldn't stop. No, I couldn't. I was willing to do almost anything to continue. I knew for me, and it's not for everybody. I knew it was my only way out, my only way through. Yeah, I had one professor, Dr. Sue Wilson, who wrote me a card at Christmas time saying, because I can imagine me, you know, I was just hungry, and she said, "You're the reason I teach. It's women like you. You're the reason I teach." And and having that kind of accolade coming from where I did, what meant everything.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, but they had no knowledge of what you had, of your journey.
Nobody did. Nobody did.
And they would have no idea.
No idea.
Why it was so important for you.
No, they wouldn't. No.
And that comment would be so meaningful.
Every time a comment like that came to me, or I was on the Dean's honor list, I mean, it just meant everything. I was, you know, my heritage predicted one road for me.
Yeah.
And mentors took me off that road. Education changed my life. And I attribute that to the people that supported me when I wanted to quit, when I didn't think I could do it. A doctor who I worked with, my very first job, he said, "You're the best social worker I've ever worked with." He actually, when my father died, Dr. Silver, he walked me down the aisle. He helped me with my research. So people like that. I think sometimes when we don't have very good parenting, we look for those people. I always had an older woman in my life who took me under her wing, or someone like Dr. Silver, who became like a father figure, who believed in me. Those people make all the difference in a person's life.
And when you got to the point, you've had all this education, and you're working in social work, and you're working with battered women and abusers and criminals and killers.
Yes.
I mean, I was always perplexed by the choice, but it probably was this piece here and this piece here.
You're
and
exactly right.
This piece here, culminating into putting together this picture of your journey, and now you're in the right place with the right tools.
Yes, and you know, when I did my research, and you know, I went into prison and interviewed men who had murdered their partners. At this point, not acknowledging that I in fact had been in a relationship where I could have been killed. I didn't know then why this was such an area. I worked in a shelter for 10 years and would say, it must be terrible to be in these kinds of relationships. And it wasn't like I was lying, it was just that I wasn't attending to that piece. And each of those steps, each of those journeys that I chose, the research, I didn't quite know why, but boy, it came in handy when it came time to write. And again, one of those murderers put me in mind of someone I had known. And that was one of the steps to telling my story.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And so now you're doing a lot of promotion around abuse. And
part of that,
giving women strength to move forward in their lives, even though it may be baby steps. But there's also an understanding, because there's always this phrase, well, why don't they just leave? Well, you know that's not possible.
No.
That is the most dangerous time. Is that process. And now with the education and experience that you have in that, you have a really deep understanding of where these people are, or these women are at.
And where the men are at.
Oh, yes.
there was a little bit of flack in university when I wanted to do this research. This research took me a couple of years and took me into a variety of prisons. And they would say, why would you want to hear men's voices? Haven't we heard enough of those? And here's what I said. If a plane went down with 120 women on it every year, we wouldn't just listen to half the black box. We would listen to all of it. And I will tell you, in my research, I could see in those men's lives the intervention point. If they'd had a mentor, someone that intervened in their violent homes, what happened might not have happened. And I think I believe that. I think we can, that's where the intervention happens, is that big brothers, big sisters, or your neighbor. You see a bully in the playground, you have to intervene.
It's that intergenerational trauma.
Yes.
And
yes.
It only takes one person.
Yes.
To put a stop, or to intervene, or to take that that son aside, that boy aside, to say, you know, we're on a difficult path here. Let's change the directory.
Yes.
So go ahead.
Well, I was going to say the people ask me, why did you write it down? And you know, I started off saying my hope for the book was that my breaking my silence, my telling my story, would allow other women to tell their story. As you know, in the first of the book, it says, the world is made up of stories, not atoms. What would happen if one woman told the truth about her life? The whole world would split open. And that's exactly what's happened to me. And everywhere I go, these 13 launches I've had, I have women coming up to me saying, you told my story, I can tell mine now. The stories that I've heard from the people that you would never expect. Yes. And so that was my hope, and that is what's happening.
Well, you have opened up a new world for so many people. And I highly recommend that you read the book, A View from Coffin Ridge, A Childhood Exhumed. It is not only a magnificent read, but be prepared for, oh my God. I'm really grateful, Gwen, that you took the time to talk to me about this, because I have just immersed myself in this book many times and feel that I now have a better understanding of my mom, and that was very powerful. And I really thank you for that.
Well, thank you.
Oh, wow. What a conversation we've had today. Please join me next time over coffee. Oh.
This program is brought to you by Rogers Xfinity, connecting you to more of what you love. Visit Rogers.com for more details. Connect with us by visiting our website or email us at comments@rogerstv.com.
It's closing time, and you stayed out longer than you planned. So now you can't drive, and the buses have stopped running. You could always call your girlfriend. Or maybe your roommate? What about your best friend? You could just dial 1-888-TAXI-GUY or use the Taxi Guy app. The call and the app are free, and they both connect you to a local cab company to bring you home safely. Visit arrivealive.org to find out more. Arrive Alive, drive sober.
When I was diagnosed with Guillain-Barré syndrome, I was deteriorating in front of everybody.
All my life I lived with sickle cell. I went through a tragic crisis that put me